Welcome. Hello.
How are you today?
You know, it's one of those days that you just are making it through a little bit. You're like, tomorrow will be better.
Oh
It's
no,
fine.
anything in particular or just
No,
little
just the
things?
state of the world, just big stuff. But very in line with this our topic today, I feel like. So I think it's probably the right mood to walk into this with. And I'm
Oh
very
my
curious to
gosh.
hear about it because I think we probably have really different takes on this. So let's go. Let's dive in.
Okay, all right. Well, for everyone who's joining, we are going to be talking about this book, Confessions of a Pagan Nun. It is a book I read every Lent, and it is a book I love dearly. I have a feeling maybe Erika, it's not going to be on her top 10 list, which is fine. We can talk about it. So I do appreciate you reading it all the way to the end. Um,
Yeah, let
and
me just say that I highlighted a ton of stuff in this book. It's a very well written book.
isn't it?
So I'd love to. I'm ready to talk about it. So it's not that I hated it. I just,
Okay.
it depressed me for sure, but I didn't hate it. So I'm
Well,
curious why you read it every year. So that, yeah.
okay. Yes. So I do. I read it every Lent. I stumbled upon it years ago. I don't even know who turned me onto it or how I came about it. Um, but I love it. It speaks to me in so many different ways. It speaks to me as a child of God who I kind of feel like I'm caught between different worlds. It speaks to me as a mother, and when I think about how I want my kids to think about me, there's some resonance in it. It speaks to me as a theologian. I'm a huge Pelagius fan, always have been. It speaks to me, the Celts say God gave us two books. The big book is nature and the little book is the Bible. So it speaks to me in like my love of nature. And some of the language is so beautiful and captures so much of the just my own innate theology and just captures it in such a beautiful way. And for me, also the symbolism of all the characters and everything that happens. And then also, for me, it's very joyful. I know maybe it doesn't have the happiest ending, but I find it joyful and just true to life. I just find it, I think maybe it's Glennon Doyle's word, but this word brutal to describe life. And I'm like, life is brutal. And I think this book just does an amazing job of capturing, some of that. So
Yeah.
those are all the reasons I would love to discuss.
Yeah, let's talk about it. I can see all of that for sure. And like I said, I mean, I think I counted a dozen bookmarks and highlights in just the last chapter of it. So I went crazy highlighting stuff because it is beautifully written.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
Well, it was funny as I was reading it through Erika eyes this year, because I always share it with somebody or bunches of people. I'm a book pusher. And I was reading, I was like, oh, Erica's not going to like that. Oh, that's going to hit Erica's button. Oh shit. This is the patriarchy. Here we go. I was like things that so I appreciate putting my Erica glasses on because it's things that don't normally bother me or that I wouldn't even, react to that made me think about it in different ways. So
yeah.
so,
All right. Yeah, patriarchy is definitely going to come up. You're going to hear that word out of my mouth for sure.
yeah,
I
no
think we
doubt.
texted yesterday on this, and I said the patriarchy ruins everything again.
Again. And I was
And
like,
this is historical fiction, so set, very far back, but a lot of parallels to many other times in history and in our present day. So,
yes. However, Bridget's flame burns to this day. So I don't know who's really winning in this patriarchy war. We can talk about that. But,
okay.
I think, so just a little context. So it is a historical fiction for anyone who reads it. And it centers in Ireland, so obviously, and it is around 5th century, late 400s. And for those who aren't really up on their Roman history, Ireland was never a Roman territory. So when Christianity followed a lot of the Roman conquering through the land. That is not how Christianity came to Ireland. So it just came by missionaries going to Ireland. So the books in that syncretic period, syncretism, when Christianity would just sort of absorb local religions and gods and goddesses and turn them into saints, and that's what this book is about. It's that sort of time period when Christianity's sort of seeping in, and the local people are torn between their traditional ways and the Druids and Christianity, and the story of one woman and her mother, basically, that kind of lived through that transition. So that kind of sets the stage for it. And an underlying theological piece, this is what really rivets me, is Pelagius. So are you familiar with Pelagius and his whole...
I wasn't until I read this book, and then I had to go back and research Pelagianism and understand why the Roman Catholics did not like it and what it represented. So very interesting. I learned a lot from that.
Yeah. Well, I think we did a thing on original sin. It was one of our first, right? And that's why I'm so anti-Augustine. And so Pelagius was the opposition to Augustine at the time. And I'm pretty sure eventually he was killed for it. But he was like, wait, we're not sinners. Grace, God gives grace, and this creation is holy and sacred and beautiful, and we have free will, and God loves us, and life is good. We don't have to walk around feeling like sinners. Not that we don't make mistakes and we all fall short of the grace of God, but this orientation of self as sinner, he was very against, which I am very against. So that's part of the struggle. And I love the way it's written in the book, where she's like, what do I know? I'm just a sinner. You're like, well said, lady. So the story, our main character, Guinevere, is, we encounter her first at a monastery, and she's in, I don't know how to pronounce all these Gaelic words, but like a clochen, but it's just basically a rock beehive type little tiny monastic dwelling outside of this monastery, and she sort of transcribes Christian scripture while also telling her story. So that's where we meet her. And as a sidebar, my daughter is named after Bridget, the goddess Bridget, and that is where she got her name, and that is where she got the spelling for her name. It is the ancient Bridget spelling. So that's where we find ourselves, in the lovely, gloomy, rainy Ireland.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that, so many things about where we begin and how it's told. So the first thing I had to look up was, it's positioned in the introduction as these scrolls have been discovered, right? So that's kind of the conceit of the setup from a fiction standpoint. So the first thing I did was, this isn't real, right? Nope, it's fiction. Okay, good. But then the way it's structured, where it intertwines telling the present day story and what happens at the monastery where she is.
Mm-hmm.
And then flashbacks to her life prior to being there. So it really alternates. And in both cases, builds to kind of this crescendo, and then those two timelines, connect.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah. It's St. Bridget's Monastery in Kildare, Ireland. And it's still there, right? It's still there. The 19 nuns. I don't know what's magical about 19, but yeah. Yes, absolutely. So her story, she is, and maybe we start, I'm not sure if you had a place you wanted to start, but maybe we start with kind of her mother and her upbringing, right? Her mother, who is very much representing sort of the old pagan way, and her mother, who is this just magical, beautiful, pagan goddess in her own right, a healer. She has, lots of power, as women often do, in understanding nature and being comfortable in nature, and, helping with herbs to heal people. She's had multiple husbands. Some could not handle her wildness, right? And her free spirit. And she really teaches Guinevere, right? All the magic that's in the forest, and all the beauty and all the herbs and all the things, right?
She's very Earth Mother.
Very, very much.
Very Celtic Earth Mother. And, is described as very striking physically as well. Her
Yep.
long black hair. Hmm.
That raven black hair. And I'm just going to be reading straight out of the book a lot because I can't remember all this and it's too beautiful to butcher. But she says, "Few were like my mother, who raised her face up from her bowl to look at the stars and hear the lark go deeper and deeper into the forest." Right. So here's this woman who is, obviously not succumbing to um, the world in front of her. She's obviously in tune with nature and called to nature and notices everything around. She says here, "When we passed a dark pool, she could tell me which spirit lived there." Which I just love, absolutely love. And so many references to um the woods, and the magic of the woods. And you know how much I love to just get lost on a hike somewhere. And it's just, to me, that is church, right? And so just genuinely love that. She even howled once, tossing her hair back and lifting her face to a moonless sky as I stared at her and shivered.
Yeah.
So,
Yes. She is portrayed as very powerful and, very self-possessed. And I thought it was interesting how she talks about, it's Guinevere is how you pronounce the main character. Guinevere talks about, traveling with her mother to these gatherings and how they initially are very joyful, and this idea of this council of women, and she attends these meetings that are the council of women. So you get in the beginning this strong sense of the culture as it has been.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And sadly, through the course of our story, her mother passes away, at a young age, probably in her 40s, right? Perhaps late 40s, maybe, which was pretty par for the course, I guess. Some ended, other fates. And it's very symbolic of sort of the demise of the pure Celtic religion, right? And the way of seeing the world as these tonsured men, the Christians, come in and slowly change the tone of life and meaning,
Hmm.
change the meaning of everything around them. So I just thought the mother's character was beautiful. And, I'm like, gosh, I hope my kids think I'm a wee bit wild. I hope they think I'm crazy. No doubt. They tell me that constantly, but, just a wee bit wild.
Wild and wise. She seems to embody both. So when I was reading it with your eyes, I immediately understood the attraction of her mother, the character of her mother, for sure. She's an amazing character. But to your point, she passes, and her passing, kind of coincides with, we already have these rumblings. I think the last time that they attend, and I can't remember, it's basically kind of like this regional gathering fair type thing. Um, but even at that last one, there is less, her mother is disturbed by what she's heard at the Council of Women. Like, you feel even before her mother's passing that there's a cloud forming that her mother is aware of, that things are changing. And because of her age and where she is in her life, she's less aware of it, but through her mother is starting to sense it. And, then her mother passes. And very shortly after, she decides to leave her home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, without the anchor, you have to become your own anchor, right? And that takes, independence and courage and, finding your own fortitude, I guess is the way to say it, right? So,
Yes. Yes. And she goes in search of a mentor and a teacher that
hmm.
she's already met and has already decided to follow.
So, Guinevere's mother dies. Well, actually, she's in her teens. Her mother hasn't passed yet. And she meets this druid. Janin is how he's pronounced, how I think believe it's pronounced in Gaelic. And she finds her man. Like she loves him as a man, but she also is drawn to his powers, right? These druids have these powers. And his are the power of words and being able to write words and read words. And she wants to learn that power and to have that wisdom. And longs for him to teach her, longs to be in relationship with him. And he basically, becomes her life and consumes her.
Yes. And yes, and he's a very interesting character. I mean, he lays out at the outset this like 9-year plan. So she must be really crazy about this guy
Well, my favorite
because
part was when he says, you can't have your own opinion for 9 years. I was like, oh, Erica's not going to like that. It's like, if you're going to become a druid, you have to just listen. You have to memorize, it's something like 355 stories or something crazy. And
yes.
at the end of 9 years, you have to tell that, that you can start having opinions on things.
Yes, and I love that Guinevere says, "Oh, I'll have opinions, but I just won't speak them." So she was immediately, I was like, "You go, girl. I like that." But he lays out an extensive plan to in essence teach her, the wisdom that he's learned, and he is already positioned as a someone who doesn't follow the standard path for a druid, even. He's someone who acknowledges some of the benefits of what Christianity is bringing to the land in terms of agriculture and other practices that will promote, a better lifestyle, help them thrive more, etc. But he's a contrarian, this guy.
He's very independent, very much a maverick, right? That loner type. And the way they describe where he lives and his garden and his little hut, with the branches and the leaves and it's just so romantic in its, in its setting. And the free agency and the free will that he has to just travel from, we'll just call it town, town to town and live his life. And he's very much, I love the arc of his character because he's very much the skeptic, throughout the story. And then of course turns out to be very devoted to Guinevere in the end. But just sort of that voice of cynicism, challenging and judging, and not only the Christians who are coming, though he sees, to your point, kind of the benefit of what they're bringing and the agriculture and, crops that don't freeze. And that was, that's obviously for people who are starving, tremendously powerful, but also a critic of druids, and just that great independent spirit, which I think I would be just like Guinevere. I'd be like, I'd like to go with him, please. I
Yes.
want to be with that guy, the
Yes.
loner who thinks for himself.
Yes. And so I think that I want to get into the power of what she learns from him because it is amazing. But any notions that I had that this might have a lovely romance in the middle of it quickly went by the wayside.
Yes. So I guess Janin, he's a little prickly, not quick to warm up. Touch is not his love language.
Well, and he tells her at one point that he's not interested in women. So, they have a relationship that's very close. I mean, they sleep together. They do try to create a child together for a while, but he says that he's not like most men and is not interested in women. So, that's a big hindrance. And I found her, I don't know if I would even say it was heartbreak because I don't even think it got to that level, but her acceptance of the limitations of that relationship while never completely letting go of her desire for it to be more than it is was difficult to read.
Mm-hmm. It is difficult to read. I agree. And it's difficult for me because it resonated.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
like, damn.
I think like the man that checks all your boxes who is unattainable is very familiar to many women.
Truth. Truth. That's what makes it so attractive, right?
Mhm.
unattainable. So what a character, right? Not exactly compassionate,
Yeah.
but again, kind of that voice, almost in a way a narrator. Obviously, clearly she's a narrator, but he's a narrator of a of the underlying tale of, the fall of the druid and the
Yeah.
reality of those tonsured men and the rise of the Christianity. So, uh,
Yes.
but
But what she learns from him, we when we first know her, she's, transcribing and even critiquing St. Patrick's Latin. So she's a very knowledgeable woman at the outset when we meet her
yeah,
later in life. And then we're flashing back and we see how she gained this knowledge and these abilities. And it really is through this relationship.
yeah.
So, in a time where people are not literate, she is highly literate. And that is a huge advantage in many ways, but also, as we'll learn, dangerous.
Hmm. Very dangerous. So her mother has passed. She goes and spends her time with Janin, learning from him. They travel around. And the relationship, as you've said, isn't exactly all that she was hoping it would be, though they function as husband and wife. She never has a child with him. And eventually through some, they part, he gets taken away by other druids. Um, because he is not taking a side against the Christians. He is not siding with the Druids and their plan to push the Christians back. So he gets taken away. She doesn't know what happens to him. She goes through a very, very difficult, rough, lonely period, and ends up eventually at the monastery, where she is now a scribe, to your point, because she's so literate with her Latin that she can transcribe all of the scriptures. And then
I thought the description of her wandering is a beautiful description of loneliness, but also just gorgeous how the tale is told of the wolf that accompanies her, how she seeks to, she goes south because she wants to find an area where her skills are valued, where the druids are still, more esteemed, but also it's a rough country. And eventually she just can't handle the fact that it is very poor, very rough country, a lot of danger. At one point, she becomes an alcoholic, and she is saved from that alcoholic spiral by a monk who was introduced to her by Janin.
yes. I
So
was
that's
going to
an
skip the alcohol
important turning point. Yeah. Sorry.
part. I was going to skip the alcohol part.
I think, well, I thought it was.
We'll cut the girl a break, right?
Yeah, well, and I mean, to be fair, she finds a place that has some comfort after so much hardship and deprivation, and the comfort is she can stay in this, in essence, kind of pub or inn or whatever, and she can ply her wares. She can write contracts for people, whatever, and be paid in food and drink. And, the girls had a rough time. I mean, I don't think we can fault her for like hanging out and having a few drinks. It just, becomes not sustainable and, goes to a dark place. And so, anyway, I think that's important because then she's at a real low point when this monk reappears and he offers her this path to a different life, by going to this monastery.
Yeah.
And so that's appealing to her at that point.
Yeah. And, what is so beautiful, even though, she's going through this difficult, dark, lonely time, and this is where some of the legend of Bridget comes in, she is still taking care of the less fortunate.
Hmm.
She trades her skills for a couple of goats, and she eats what she needs, and then she gives away to those who are less fortunate. The goddess Bridget was known for her compassion, and taking care of others and healing and feeding others. And so even though things are very difficult for her, she still, lives a life that is of a higher calling, and a truer calling than the world in which she lives in. And the piece, that you mentioned about the wolf is so beautiful, and not only that this wolf accompanied her, but she comforted the wolf in its death and, stroked it and spoke to it as it died, and then used its cloak, used its fur as a cloak, and just kind of that symbiotic relationship with nature, and that it's all sacred and holy, even something that would probably be as terrifying as a wolf. Um, the deeper relationship is revealed, and the interconnectedness of it all, is revealed, which again just reinforces the way I see nature and the way I see the world, and we're all connected and it's all holy. There is, nothing is really heretical. It's all sacred. It's what we do
Yeah.
with it. But
Yeah, and I think we talked about her mother, being this kind of earth mother archetype almost. But I think it's interesting that she gains all of this knowledge, but she marries it, to your point, with what she learned from her mother and then her natural innate goodness that drives her to serve others.
yeah,
So that's what makes her a really compelling character for sure.
yeah, yeah. And, she walks the line between the two religions. And there's a quote in here, she's talking about her mother and remembering her mother, but I think it really speaks to why she can't let go, which is, she's anyway, remembering her mother. My mother's fingers holding herbs stained by the black earth she dug them from, and her merry mouth, one side curling up, are pictures of pagan freedom that I cannot purge or unlove. Right. And
Yes.
so, even though she's moving towards this monastery, she's still holding dear and in her heart all the things that are so beautiful. And theologically, some people have a real issue with, um, absorbing the local custom, right? Turning the pagan goddess Bridget into a saint. I find it beautiful. And why purge and unlove things that are so beautiful? So it's something that I appreciate and feel like I do in my daily life, the way I've kind of built my own faith, I guess you could say, that maybe doesn't follow any particular path or rule. So,
Yeah, she very much brings that to, and when she arrives, we learn that later that when she arrives, the nun that's in charge asks her if she's been baptized, and she says yes, which she hasn't.
God
Uh,
forgive me.
and then she can never confess it after that. So she lives with that. But, it informs obviously the title of the book itself, A Pagan Nun, Confessions of a Pagan Nun. But she lives in both of these worlds. So she still goes to the woods to gather herbs with some of the local townswomen. She is, transcribing scrolls and doing the work at the monastery. And she balances those two things and incorporates them into her life.
Yes. Yes. And unfortunately, it becomes her undoing. It does
Yes.
become her undoing. So, as our story unfolds, as she's telling us the story of her life, there is a woman whose child is dying. And she brings her child to the monastery and gives it to the nuns because she can't watch another child die, which I can't even as a mother begin to know what that must be like. And the child doesn't make it through the night, and they have to bury the child kind of away from the monastery in this special place where the unbaptized and the suicides are buried, and it becomes an ongoing line of the story that something is digging this child up repeatedly, and causes a great stir within the monastery, and lots of tumult, I guess you could say. And in
Yes.
parallel to that, there is Aileen, who is the daughter of a chieftain, who is described as mad for some reason we don't know. And she's been, dropped off at the door of this monastery. Later, we find out why. Her father was sort of fearful of her pagan ways, and he had become a Christian. And, he destroyed the things that she loved to try and put her focus on Christianity. So there's lots of parallel stories happening um, as we watch Guinevere struggle with her own duality, I guess you could say.
Yes. Yeah. We have the child, which is very dark, right? That this grave continues to be disturbed. We have the arrival of Eileen, and who's clearly unhinged. I mean, just so clearly unhinged. Could not be more. Uh. And then also the abbot. We can't forget
I was
all of
like,
those things
talk about the abbot.
roughly coincide, right?
Yes. And so as the story unfolds, we learn why Aileen is a little off, we'll say, because of trauma from her father.
I would
And
say crazy as a bed bug, but yes.
I'm gonna try and cut the girl a break. Yes, and come to find out, in one of the attempts of her father to save her from her pagan ways, a monk arrives and they fall passionately in love. And he is so committed to his Christianity that the thought of, sinning with her causes them to put on literal chastity belts made of metal. And that obviously caused them both irritation, which turn into infections and wounds. And it's just a very odd, encounter that, proceeds and carries on. And ultimately the priest castrates himself to keep his sin at bay and ends up at the same monastery. So, what a monastery is more like a soap opera.
It is. It does become the center of drama for sure. And what I'll say is, I felt like that whole storyline and section, and the fact that it goes to the extent of castrating himself. Oh my gosh! So to me, so emblematic of the denial of bodily pleasures that is inherent in Christianity to a large degree, and this denial of the sins of the flesh. If you're not watching on video, I'm doing big quote marks right here. But this denial of of this attraction, and this equating it to this horrible sin, and all of the horrible things that then unfold based on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons I don't like it. No, it was, but I mean, it was very, she talks a lot in the beginning about how under the pagan culture, you would have a husband, which basically meant someone you slept with, or, and it was pretty fluid. I mean, if a relationship wasn't working out, he would go find a new wife, she would go find a new husband, etc. And so you see this kind of strict definition of relationships, this, all the rules based, this rules based approach to how you think about interpersonal relationships or romantic relationships, right?
Yeah, I think, again, it's highlighting, not necessarily, I'm going to say this wrong, but, just some of the absurdities of Christianity
Yeah.
in comparison and contrast to paganism, and your body was sacred. Your desires were given to you by God, right? And so why would that be bad? Contrast that with the priest who castrates himself, so the schism there is on full display, cannot be missed. And again, is part of the reason why I love Pelagius being sort of woven through this, because it goes back to, the earth being sacred, or us being sacred. Everything is a gift. It's not a punishment. It's not a sin.
Yes.
And so, there's a lot in here about Pelagius that I would love to chat about. But if you want to talk more about castration.
No, I don't. Before we talk more about Pelagianism or Pelagius, I think the only thing I wanted to add was that, it is kind of the median or the through line that is more palatable, because I don't want to understate that under paganism, Ireland is a rough place, and it's brutal. It's, people are struggling to survive. And it's also, so it's not that it's a utopia that is then ruined, there are definitely problems in it. So I just want to be cognizant of that. I like to be very critical of Christianity and some of its limitations, but certainly there were improvements that were brought, and it wasn't, this like Garden of Eden before Roman Catholicism arrives.
No, absolutely. And back to the idea of brutal. Do you know? And that was was that medieval times? I think it was pretty
Mm-hmm.
brutal for everyone everywhere. And would I want to have to scratch in the dirt and pray that my potatoes grew for food and to like not have warmth? And no, I wouldn't want any of that. But I think this idea that one is right and one is wrong and one is good and one is bad is absurdity.
Right.
Absolute and complete absurdity, right?
Yeah.
And so if we can dive into Pelagius a little
Let's
bit,
do
because
it.
I know what I'll be getting you for Christmas. I'll get you a book of Pelagius. Um, so these are just some references we can just kind of talk through that are peppered throughout the book. So this quote says, like the tree on which our Lord Jesus was sacrificed, they and all the plants and animals and elements had a part to play in all adventures and revelations. It is no mystery that the Pelagians, those Christians who taught that all things are part of God and therefore good, found an easy welcome in this land where each twig is divine.
Mm-hmm.
Which is so beautiful, and we've talked about this before, but just to kind of split definitions or split hairs and get into definitions, there's pantheism and there's panentheism. Pantheism is that everything is its own God, each tree is its own God, whatnot. Panentheism is God in all things. So by acknowledging creation as sacred, you're simply acknowledging the presence of God in all things, right? And so this line of, each twig is divine, that's the panentheism sort of coming through that I believe deeply. And I love this, for I believe that which is sacred does not care what name it is called.
Yes. Can I read? I think towards the end, there's a section that I highlighted
Mm-hmm.
that is very much in line with this. It says, those lands rumble with a large beauty of varying colors and heights. I cannot see that any religion is true that does not recognize its gods in the green wave of trees on a mountainside or the echo of a bird's song that makes ripples on a shadowed pool.
I mean, isn't that beautiful? We're
Yeah,
going
I
to get
mean,
to
it's
all
beautiful.
nature.
It's beautifully written.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've got all the green. All the green is nature quotes. We'll get to those, right?
Love it.
But it's just rings so true for me. And then, talking about, the kind of the Christian way and the self-flagellation, self-hatred seems to me an evil thing in itself rather than an antidote to evil, right? So
Mm-hmm.
this idea that we're not sinful, why would you hate yourself? God made you, right? Like just the beauty with which the theology is, you know, laid out. And she plays with the words here. This is Guinevere, just kind of as she's writing and talking. And I don't understand, God forgive me, I guess. What does she say? I don't understand these things because I'm ignorant. It's like, oh, you are not ignorant. You are very, very wise. Guinevere is very humble through this whole thing,
She is very humble. Yes.
very humble in her wisdom. And let's see here. What else do we have? Oh, yes. The Christians and their tonsured messengers want to separate the souls of the people of this land from the earth they walk on.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
See, things that I think Christianity is still doing to this day makes me crazy. This idea of dominance over everything. Here's another one. The new priests have divided the world into good and evil, separating things of the sky from things of the earth. They teach that the things of the earth are evil, and all those who do not follow their laws are evil.
Yep.
I would have been such a good pagan, Erika. In fact, I think I am a good pagan.
Oh, I think you are. I think one of the things that's most interesting Yeah, there's so many things interesting about you, Susan, but one at the top of the list is just how you reconcile, all of your combination of your special stew of faith that you have. Because clearly I'm a don't espouse anything, consider everything person, but you embrace things and try to meld them and see how they fit together. And, I read this whole book like Christianity messing everything up per the usual.
Or the huge. And I'm like, I think I need communion. I need to go receive communion, because to me,
Yes.
there is no difference. Like it's, if you look at it the right way, and I guess, right, wrong, or otherwise, I'll never be,
No.
I'll never be a reverend. I'll never be a priest, but I do want to point out. So this one, back to her drinking problem, her little drinking spell.
Yes.
His name is Mongun. So the priest who helps her, he represents the kind of priest that that I appreciate, and he tells her plainly that Christ loves her well and has given her her talents to be used to service and comfort Christ's children. That's right. So
Yeah.
this good guy, this priest who finally, represents my kind of Christianity.
Yeah. He represents a different version or flavor in the narrative for sure, because the way she originally meets him is that he knows Janin, and he comes to where they live and they share a meal and he stays for a bit. And so, I mean, he's a monk that's already like befriended a contrarian druid. And so, I think represents a different he's a different type of Christian representative in this story for sure.
And he goes on to echo this idea that all God has made is sacred, but in ways that human cannot understand with thoughts, but must know in the moment between breaths. And now we're back to meditation.
Yeah. Well, always. Is there a time we don't get back to meditation? I don't think so.
Which I have to say, I have not been doing a good job. I've been so stressed lately, and like up early and up late, and I haven't been. And boy, I tell you what, I've not been a super nice person lately.
It's the key to so much. I know. I haven't been great about it either. And, obviously, a lot going on in the world, but I find I thought, why is my anxiety so high? And a lot of very valid reasons for that, but also probably haven't been taking the time I need to find my center and just breathe for a bit.
Yeah, and I just to be outside, to realize that I am the witness, I'm not the thought, to meditate, to hike, to just be in it. Like, man, I tell you what, when I get unmoored from that, it's not pretty. It's really not pretty. And reading this again for our discussion, I was like, good reminder, just a really good reminder. And also a little, I don't want to say condemning, but a little condemnation falling on me. And this is my favorite. Okay, this is probably one of my favorite theological lines in the whole thing.
Okay.
I would live in a world full of Christ-like humans, but not one full of Christians. May
Oh,
God.
I highlighted that one too. Same, man.
Right?
Yes.
Isn't that perfect? I'm like, yes, Guinevere, yes. That is so right. Isn't that like it just infuriates me. Like I think Christ is very unhappy. He's very unhappy.
Well, I think it's obviously I can't speak as a believer because I'm not, but I would imagine that it's very disheartening. And I've heard people say it's very disheartening to see. I mean, over time, Christianity has been hijacked to serve the powerful many, many times in history. But it's difficult to see that happen if this is your faith,
Oh,
that it's perverted in a way that is not recognizable.
yeah. It's infuriating, but it's also not my faith. Like I know that sounds
It's
crazy, but like I think it was C.K. Chesterton, some famous theologian, he said, it's not that Christianity has failed, it's that it's never really been tried. And I'm like, right on, like there's just so much that's wrong, but yet I feel at home in any church I step into, like I know the presence of God is there, um, as it is everywhere. But yeah, I was like, that's right, sister. That's right.
Hmm. Yes.
That's right.
Yeah. And she even states at one point, these are the things that I've found to be true. She has a list um, that she goes through, but it's kind of her own manifesto of her beliefs in a way.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
There's I love Van Morrison. And one of my all-time favorite songs, Van Morrison song called Stranded. I don't know if you've ever heard it. If you haven't, I will send it to you. And he talks about how he's just sort of stranded in this world, caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. And just this kind of feeling of like, I'm here, but I'm not really here. I'm here, but I think I'm made of something different, and I've always had this sort of restlessness about me, like I, just that same feeling. And one of the things that she says towards the end of the book is restlessness abides. I feel like the horse who smells the storm, though the sky is blue. I'm like,
Hmm.
like that. There's so many things just about her that resonate with me. We talked about a lot of it, even the loneliness and even the restlessness, but the defiance and the faith and I don't know. I just think it's magical. I just think it's
Yes.
magical.
Yeah. I love that quote that you just read as well. That's among my many, many highlights. Um, there's this symbolism of the horses throughout as well. So I don't know if you want to talk about that now, but I thought that was very
Yeah,
interesting that
sure. We talk about all.
there are these two wild horses, a mare and a stallion that roam nearby and have at one point she mentions that I think one of them trampled someone from the village and but they cannot be tamed and they're supposedly from a warrior who died in battle and they and so they pop up throughout the narrative. She mentioned seeing them um, and then at the end we see that our Eileen has convinced one of them to come close because she's a horsewoman. We find out in her past, but also I don't know that I can articulate the symbolism of those horses, but I found it compelling that they're woven throughout the whole story.
Hmm. Hmm. Are you a horsewoman? Did you grow up on
I
horse?
am not, in fact, opposite. Horses have tried to kill me too many times. I'm done with them. Done with them.
All right, I want to invite you to go riding. So I
Oh, we
grew up
talked
on a
about
horse.
this once before because you were like, I can change your mind.
You
And I
know
was
what?
like,
Maybe
yeah,
I shouldn't try. Maybe that's
yeah,
arrogance on my part. But I'm a horse girl. I love horses. There is nothing, the wildness, the barely contained wildness of a full gallop is spectacular. And so for me, the horses are that pure, unbridled spirit,
yeah.
and
Although so what did you think in the end that Eileen is close to taming one of them, or at least has it a little bit, it's connecting with her?
like knows like.
Yeah.
Like knows like. And we didn't get into it, we discussed it earlier, but the trauma from her father is, he wanted to marry her off and she wasn't really interested, and she had a black stallion that she loved, and she wanted to spend all of her time with that stallion, which I can totally relate to. Like that was my junior high school weekend. I was like, take me to the stables. And he bludgeons her horse to death in front of her.
Yeah.
And that is just horrific. I can't even imagine, like that. I just can't even imagine, right? um and it broke her spirit. And I think in a way that horse brought her spirit back to her, so
Yeah. Yeah. I could see that.
so many layers in this book,
So
right?
many layers.
So many.
And the descriptions of nature are amazing.
Okay, all right, you ready for
Yeah.
those? Okay,
Yeah.
I got to figure out, I'm going to say this to somebody, I don't know who. Okay, so let's go through some of these nature quotes, right? So she's describing Janin when she first meets him as a druid, right? And she's talking about how his fingers were long, and she said, I had felt he had once, perhaps as recently as this morning, been a tree. Right on.
She's very mystical for sure.
Been a tree. Trees are amazing. I love trees. I'm the girl that runs and hugs trees. Friend of mine, every time we go to San Francisco, we go out to Muir Woods, right? Of course. John Muir is one of my top 5 loves. And I'm out there hugging fucking trees. Like I'm literally hugging trees. And I'm like, come on, hug the tree. And she's like, oh, I can't believe we're making me hug the tree. I'm like, we're hugging trees.
I'm all for hugging trees. That sounds great.
Yeah, yeah. Here's another one. Listen to the voices that speak only to someone who can be very quiet. The wind has a voice, the leaves have voices, the stones have voices. So true. If you listen, you'd be amazed at what you hear. I'm just going to keep reading. I want to take her hand at times and run with her far, far to the deep woods so that the branches whip our faces and briars tear our skirts, and we run so far and so swiftly as to be transformed into deer, leaping free of any doctrine but the doctrine of pools and grass.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Who needs doctrine beyond pools and grass? Not me. That works just fine.
I'd love to be a deer. Sounds lovely.
Yeah, she just talks about, the tree, the leaf, the sky are part of God and his grace. People of this land know its power and cannot pretend to forsake what they see and feel and hear around them every day.
There's a level of denial. One of the things when things start to go wrong at the monastery is, there's this denial of her herb knowledge, that there are benefits to it, etc. And so that is, this denial of the earth is very clearly demonstrated, by the abbot and the way he takes control of the monastery, because originally it's run just by the nuns, and then he really comes in, and even though he doesn't have clear authority, he assumes it, and then quickly everyone is under his control.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so the tone and tenor changes, and as we've already mentioned, Guinevere becomes the assumed culprit for the disruption of the grave of the child. And then they find her writings where she's telling her story, and then, going into the woods to capture and get the herbs. And, she becomes the scapegoat, if you will.
Yes. And you feel it building, but then literally she's accused of being a witch, and all these horrible things are attributed to her. And honestly, it's clear that this is the direction things are headed, and very frustrated with the character as I'm reading it, because I'm like, girl, you got to get out of there. You got to go. And of course she has to go to the chapel one last time, and that proves to be her downfall. Mm. And we haven't talked about, she re-encounters this man.
Yes.
That was integral to her life.
Yeah. So the ending of the story is bittersweet, in a way, right? So Janin, the druid that she loved and followed and spent so many years and learned to write from and learned all these druid ways from, who had disappeared. She thought she saw him earlier, at the monastery, and just thought, oh, he's this old monk that can't speak. But she's like, was that Janin or was that not? And she convinces herself that it was just an illusion. But it turns out it's him. He comes to her there, and obviously in devotion and love. And he's had his tongue cut out, I guess, from the time that he was taken away many, many years before. But he's found her, he's followed her, he's come to where she is, and it is her downfall. Yep.
Yeah. And I think too, there's, I think she always had this idea that he was her refuge, and not knowing what had happened to him in that moment when she recognizes him again, there's also this realization that he is now an old man, and she is stronger than he is. So there's no relief or refuge in him returning to her life, which I thought was also very sad.
But think about the parallel between she and her mom. So her mom was a very powerful woman. And, I think sometimes as women, we're afraid to embrace our power. And Guinevere, was very powerful. She was her own hero of her own story.
For sure, she was. But I think this is probably where, you relate with the character. I think I'm a strong woman. I'd like a break once in a while. And she's been through so much, I just wanted that reconnection to be a little bit more satisfying, right?
Yeah.
So, but they do reconnect, and I think she does find, seems that she finds peace in that she finally knows what happened to him. He's there. They share an emotional moment together, even though he can't speak. But then she's taken and put in chains and put in her little hut, and then eventually she's marched through the town and thrown into a well.
You said it. I can't believe you said it. Yes. So she's the pagan witch. She's the reason the men have decided that she's the reason for the disturbance of the grave, And as they march her through the little village area, I think they said it was like 2 Roman miles to this well that is deeper than 10 men standing on top of each other, kind of thing. What I find so powerful about it is the women that rally to her. So the woman whose child it was, she's like, no, I came and got my child back. I wanted him to have a true pagan burial. It wasn't her. Aileen, who was, our, as you said, crazy nun, is now the abbess, right? She's risen to this stature of the actual abbess of the monastery. Is
Speaking
there,
further to the corruption of that whole structure, but go ahead, yes.
but she's not crazy anymore. The horse brought her spirit back. Anyway, and what I love is that Guinevere, the way they describe her, she wasn't silent. She wasn't stoic, right? She wasn't wailing. She was present. She was like, I am afraid, but she walked tall and she got to the well. They set her down on the edge of the well. She asked for poison in case she didn't die or drown, and they wouldn't give it to her. And no pleading, no histrionics, and then silence when she goes into the well.
Yeah. Well,
And
and they encourage the townspeople to stone her, and the townspeople won't, because she's helped them. Even the guy who comes to put her shackles on or chain her to the ground in her hut apologizes to her because she has, helped his family and sat when one of his children died, or his wife, I can't remember. But the townspeople, they walk her to this end, but they refuse to be the persecuting crowd that is probably desired by the folks who are enacting this. And then they, even after she's fallen in the well, they go and throw hemlock in the well so that she can eat it in case she somehow survived that fall. So, man, a dark ending, beautiful book.
it's not a
But
dark ending. It's
a
not a dark.
ton to think about. A ton to think about, for sure.
I mean, please, if you felt it was dark, then I don't mean to undo that. But, I guess I've read it so much, perhaps it's easy for me to cut between her as a character and her as the symbolism of paganism,
For sure.
and just the beauty of throwing the hemlock in the well, and that girls and women still go to that well and they still throw hemlock, and knowing that Bridget's flame still burns. I think it went out in like the 12th century. And then literally in 1993, the nuns came back together around this monastery in Kildare and lit the fire again. So there's an enduring power to, these kinds of women and this story and this, I don't know, I don't want to call it paganism, but this arc of spirituality that still continues in Christianity today. It's alive and well. You just have to know where to look. Which, I find incredibly beautiful, and,
Yeah, I agree. And I think I anticipated this is where we would each come to the discussion, the point of view we would each come with, because I do think that there is beauty in, obviously this is a very gendered story. So let's start with that, because she has a distinctly feminine female point of view, and it talks a lot about how what it's like to be a woman in her world changes over this time period. So I think it is beautiful how women, especially, or anyone, any group that is marginalized and has historically been marginalized, the survival techniques and the strength to kind of endure and continue under, less than ideal circumstances in some cases, where you're not allowed to flourish or you're not allowed to be as visible. I think that there is a lot of beauty in that, because I'm an Enneagram 8 and justice oriented, and probably have been a man in every previous life that I've ever been in. I find it infuriating. It makes me very angry. So I wish, and perhaps someday I'll be able to attain that, flip my perspective, because I do think the endurance is beautiful, and the ways in which, even with repression, things continue and goodness thrives and all these things. I think it is wonderful. I just don't want them to have to endure.
Well, wouldn't that be ideal,
Yeah.
I don't know if I believe in previous lives, but I don't think I've ever been a man. I think I've always been a woman. And I think that I don't know. I see the stronger strength below the surface noise, and that's what grounds me. That's what I feel like I'm more tapped into. And I hate to break it to you, my love, but we're gonna die at some point. The only thing you must do in life is die. I think that's literally in the book too.
It is.
And if I'm gonna be marched to a well, that's the way I want to go. You know, I want
Yeah.
to, go in my full self.
Yes.
I'm not going to scream. I'm not going to cry.
Yeah. To
Nothing
meet
but
your death with dignity is, I think, everyone's hope for sure. Whatever the circumstances are. I would love for it to be very peaceful. But I do say that somewhat jokingly. I don't necessarily believe in past lives either. And at some point we will finally do a episode on um what's the word I'm looking for, Susan? My brain just
reincarnation or
no, on hypnotherapy. We've talked about several times, because
Mhm.
I, had several, and one of those was a past life regression that was very interesting to me. So I don't necessarily believe in any of it, per the usual. That's the way I am. But I do find it interesting, and it is a funny joke to say, you
It
know,
is a funny joke,
to
but if we're
say
going to joke about
clearly
it,
I
I
was a man in
really,
all my past lives, and
I
and
just don't.
and evidently horrible to women, and now all the payback is
And I
right
bet
here.
you were a priest, don't you think? At this point,
Oh, I don't know, maybe, clearly, yeah.
Pope. Maybe you were Pope.
A pope. That would be hilarious.
We'll have to
Oh,
do. I've never done a past life regression. Maybe I need to do one, and then you can. We should make the next topic your story.
okay, we'll do it. Yeah, what I learned from half a dozen hypnotherapy sessions.
Uh
It
huh.
was a really interesting
It was.
experience for sure.
I will have very little to contribute, if nothing, but I love the story. Would love to chat about it. But thank you for reading the book.
Yes. Yeah. No, I'm glad I read it. And so sorry if I dissuaded anyone listening from picking up this book, because it is beautifully written. It's a really symbolic story. Uh, like I said, I highlighted a ton of stuff that I think I will go back and read. Those sections that I highlighted, I'll reread those many times. I just, of course, being a justice warrior, was like, no. So
Yeah, yeah,
frustrated by that narrative.
I know. But now that it's Lent, right? So Ash Wednesday, Lent is my favorite time of the year. Yeah, it's right up there. I mean, it's, neck and neck with Christmas and quarter four, right? But I love Lent. I love the intensification of the experience. And the reason I read this book is it does bring me back in a very visceral way to what I believe in my mind, which is everything around me is sacred. and to just sort of wallow in that for Lent brings me great joy. And I think that's what this book does for me. And it reminds me that, despite all the noise, because there's just so much noise, every twig is divine.
Yes. It's a beautiful way to live. I'm going to go on a walk right after this, and is what I will do. I will look at every twig and enjoy the birds and the blue sky.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you have to do on the hard days, especially.
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
All right, my dear. Well, thank you again. And I look forward to a hypnotherapy discussion in our next episode of Sacredish.
Yes, we'll get crazy. I love it.